Hello everyone. In this video, we will be making a bench power supply at home. So first up, we need a box like this one. Then we have this DC to DC buck converter. It has controls for both voltage as well as the current. Next up, we have this 14 volt 3 amp lead acid battery charger. I have two of these. Both of these are 3 amp and 14 volts. So if we connect them in series, we will get a total of 28 volts. Next up, we need this switch, an indicator light, this volt and amp meter, and a female connector like this one. So for now, that's what we need. There are a few other components that we will see later in the video. So let's start arranging them inside of this box. Now I will make the markings and we will cut the slots for these components. So we have made the markings. Now let me cut the slots for these components and we will carry on from there. So I have made the slots for these components. Now let's start placing them in their slots. Now I'm using super glue to fix this female connector. You can also use the screws. Now let's keep this to our side and we will start working with the wiring. So the first thing we need to do is we will connect these 14-volt chargers in series, so we will get a total of 28 volts in the output. So let's do it. Now we will connect the 28-volt output of the two chargers to the input of this buck converter. So now we will connect the input 220 volts of both the chargers together. Now we will use this 5-volt DC voltage regulator IC. We will use this to run a 5-volt cooling fan and also the amp and voltmeter that I have shown you earlier. So let's solder it to the circuit. So basically this MOSFET has three legs. Out of them, the first one is the positive input, the middle one is the ground, which is common for input and output, and the last pin is positive output. So I have soldered three wires to this MOSFET. Now let's add this to the circuit. So to add this MOSFET to the circuit, we will have to connect the positive input of the MOSFET to the 28 volt positive output of the two chargers, and the negative, which is common ground, we will have to connect with the negative 28 volts of the two chargers. So I have connected the positive input of this MOSFET to the positive 28 volt output of the two chargers. Now, while connecting the ground to the 28 volt negative of the two chargers, we will add another wire, and this will basically be our minus 5 volt DC, which we will use to run the cooling fan and the amp and voltmeter. So these are the two 5-volt output wires. So the connections are almost done. Now all we need to do is connect the amp meter and also the voltmeter. Now to connect the amp meter and the voltmeter, we will have to connect the red wire of the amp meter with the yellow sensing wire of the voltmeter. And now we will connect both of these to the positive output of the buck converter. So the black wire you see now is not negative, but it's actually positive. Now let's take this wire and connect this to the negative output of the buck converter. So the black wire and the yellow wire, these will be our positive and negative variable outputs. Now let's connect the positive and negative wires of the voltmeter to the positive and negative wires of the 5-volt output from the MOSFET. We will also add two additional wires to the MOSFET, which we will use for the cooling fan. Now the most of circuit is complete. We will remove one of the potentiometers, which is for the voltage, and we will add a multi-turn potentiometer in place of that. You can also do the same for the current, but I don't need to change the current much, so I will keep the potentiometer for the current as it is. The potentiometer has 3 legs, but 2 of them are soldered together, so you only need to solder 2 wires. Also for the multi-turn potentiometer, you will have to connect the first 2 legs like this, then we will connect one wire to these 2 legs and one wire to the remaining leg. So basically all the connections are done except the cooling fan, and you will see a change here. I have flipped the wires here, so now the yellow one will be positive and the red one will be negative. I have done this as the ammeter was not working correctly like I have connected it before. Now it's working properly. So you will also have to do the same changes. The positive sensing wire of the voltmeter will stay at the positive. You just need to flip the wires of this ammeter. Now let's tape everything up to cover the exposed wires. So now we will connect the yellow positive wire with the positive of the female connector, and the red wire, which looks like positive but it's actually negative, we will connect it with the negative of the female connector. So basically all the connections are done. So now let's place these circuit boards inside of that plastic box. We will use some double-sided tape to hold these components on their place. Now we have two connectors. This one will be for the amp meter and the another one will be for the voltmeter. As you can see, the wire is a little bit short, so I will extend it. Now let's zip tie everything up to make it look a little bit less messy. Now we will connect the input 220 volts AC to a connecting lead through a switch. This thing is pretty easy to do, so I will just fast forward through this bit. Also, one of the two chargers came with an indicator LED, so I will just use that as an indicator. So this is the LED indicator that came with one of the chargers. I just extended it through the wires. This was taking too long, so I just cut it up. Now let's use some paper tape to cover the exposed contacts of the female connector. So now let's hook up the connecting lead. Now let's add the only remaining thing, which is a 5-volt DC fan. We will first have to make a slot for it. So I have made a vent for the cooling fan. So now let's fix the cooling fan on its place, and then we will connect the two wires with the wires we have left on earlier for the cooling fan. So I use super glue to fix the cooling fan. Now let's connect the two wires. So finally everything is done. It looks pretty amazing, and now all we need to do is close the box and then we will test it. Now before we close the box, let me once again quickly explain all the connections. So first we connected the input 220 volts of both the chargers together through a switch and connecting lead. We also connected the output of two chargers in series to get a total of 28 volts. The output went to the MOSFET and we got 5 volt output to the fan and the ammeter and voltmeter from the MOSFET. Also, the output from the chargers got to the buck converter. To the positive of the buck converter, we will connect the yellow sensing wire of the voltmeter, and also we will connect the yellow output wire which will go to the female connector. And to the negative, we will connect the negative wire of the ammeter, and the red wire, it will be our negative. Also, we removed one of the potentiometers. This one was for the voltage and we used multi-turn potentiometer in place of it. And also we used indicator lights from one of the chargers. So that's basically it. Now we will close the box and we will test it. So now is the time for testing this power supply. So we will use two alligator clips, one for positive and one for the negative. Now let's turn on the switch. First, let's test how much it can go down. So it went all the way down to the 1.2 volts. Now let's see the maximum voltage. So it can go all the way up to 28 volts, as you can see. So let's first test this 12 volt DC fan. So as you can see, it runs perfectly fine. You may have already noticed that the amp meter is not working properly. It is showing very low amps. When I tested it with a multimeter, this fan was consuming about 1 amps, and I guess the amp meter is not working. The connections are correct, but I guess something is wrong with the amp meter. I will surely change it in the future. As you can see, once we short the two terminals, it is showing a maximum current of about 2.2 amps, which is not correct. Once I test it with the multimeter, it shows a current of about 5 amps. So here I have this 12 volt 20 watt LED. You can see enclosed with maximum brightness. Now let's try to charge a lithium ion battery. So I will set the voltage to 4.2 volts. you can see it's charging the lithium ion battery perfectly fine. So yeah, that's it for this video. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe the channel and make sure you watch every video that I make. Thanks everyone and have a nice day.